Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of some winter book recommendations. Generally when I do these recommendations videos, I try to make sure that I'm not repeating any of the books that I mentioned in the previous year's seasonal recommendations, but apparently I haven't done a winter dedicated book recommendations video. So I'm actually going to be breaking this video up into two different parts. That way you have a bunch of different options. A lot of the books that I'm recommending are based on it feeling colder and the kinds of books that I think go really well with that, but obviously a lot of you are not in the northern hemisphere or you don't live somewhere where you have a different climate for the seasons. So I'd love to know what books you personally feel are good to read for this time of year. And then also a quick thank you to Book of the Month for working with me on today's video. Book of the Month is a super popular and fast-growing online book subscription service where you have 5 brand new hardcover books to choose from every single month. It's risk-free, so even with those 5 selections, if there isn't one that you're interested in, you can always skip that month and accumulate credits that you can then use in future months for add-ons. Kicking off this month's picks, we have A Flicker in the Dark, which is a lyrical thriller following the daughter of a murderer. After 20 years have passed since her father admitted to killing teenage girls, Chloe Davis is finding similar crimes being committed again. Is it just her imagination, or will she, for the second time in her life, unmask a killer? On a happier note, we have The Holiday Swap, which follows twin sisters who trade places after an accident leads sister Charlie, incapable of doing her job as a judge on her reality baking show. Things get complicated when love is thrown into the mix. Will a twins' identity swap be a recipe for disaster, or does it have all the right ingredients for getting their lives back on track? After that, we have Olga Dies Dreaming, which is a debut tale of a status-driven wedding planner grappling with her social ambitions, absent mother, and Puerto Rican roots. After that, we have A History of Wild Places, which is a richly atmospheric adult debut following 3 residents of a secluded, seemingly peaceful commune as they investigate the disappearances of 2 outsiders. After that, we have Somebody's Daughter, which is a powerful memoir showcasing the story of a childhood defined by the looming absence of Ashley C. Ford's incarcerated father. For this month's add-on, we have Anthropocene Reviewed, which is a collection of essays on the current geological age in which humans have profoundly reshaped the planet and its biodiversity. If you're new to Book of the Month, you are welcome to choose any of these books as your first pick, and you can get it for only $5 using the code JOLLY. Jumping into the book recommendations, the first one on the list, everybody recommends it for winter, and then I read it around the holidays this time-ish last year, and I understand why everybody recommends it, and I have to recommend it too, just because it is the absolute perfect winter read, and that would be The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. From the folklore aspects to the writing style to the setting, everything about this book just screams winter. There aren't too many books I've read where I genuinely feel cold while reading. This book 100% made me feel that way. I have in some ways compared this to the Witcher series just because the types of folklore and the monsters that show up in this book are very similar to the Witcher series. So if you're looking for something along similar lines to Witcher in that regard, I would definitely give this one a go. The plot, of course, is very different though. We follow a girl who's living in a part of Russia that currently still is holding on to their beliefs while simultaneously combining that with the newer religious beliefs. And then we have another character who ends up coming into the area where our main character lives, and she is very, very devout and wants to try and rid this area of any of their older beliefs. She believes that in having these held so strongly in this community that it's going to bring evil upon them. And there's some truth to that, but also there's a lot more going on. It's actually quite scary. I was surprised. There's almost aspects of horror woven into this, and then also some fae type of things that a lot of us have seen before, except for very, very dark and somewhat grim. The setting, though, truly is the thing that shines in this. It is unbearable. The cold, the consequences of it is more than just I walk outside and I need a coat sort of a situation. They are thinking about the winter months in advance because they know that if they are not prepared for the winter, they will die. And so you see them ahead of time constantly thinking about what they're going to have to do with their crops and traveling. And there's just so many aspects that go into survival in this harsh Russian winter. Next up is a book that somehow has ended up, I feel like, in every video I have done as of late, and that would be For the Wolf. I have talked about this book so many times at this point, so if you want to skip ahead to the next recommendation, I completely understand. But this one follows a girl named Rhaedaris. It is kind of a hybrid of Little Red Riding Hood and Beauty and the Beast. It's a retelling in some ways of both. So you follow this main character who, the way that their kingdom works is that the second royal daughter has to be sacrificed, not killed, but just given over to this being that lives in these dark woods called the wolf. The setup of the story sounds very similar to Uprooted, I promise. It's really not like Uprooted beyond just that general setup. But of course, like a lot of stories, we have this preconceived idea of who the wolf is, and he's this monstrous person, and nobody knows what happens to the girls, but they just assume the worst. And then when our main character, Rhaedaris, has to face her fate and go because she is the second royal daughter, when she has to be sacrificed to this being, she finds out that everything is not as it seems, and there's a lot at stake, specifically with the forest. So the forest setting is kind of dark, kind of creepy, perfect for winter. It definitely has that colder feel, not quite to the degree that The Bear and the Nightingale has, but I personally just think anything to do with the woods and the outside always screams fall and winter to me. Plus this cover. How can this cover not scream fall, winter? I also generally think retellings when I think of fall and winter, so I think this is the perfect time to pick this one up. And it is a little bit lighter. I think a lot of times winter stories can be kind of a drag because winter can be so brutal. And then this one brings in kind of a character-driven aspect, and also there's a little bit of a romance. Not a little bit, there's a lot of romance in this one. Not anything too over the top. If you're somebody who maybe doesn't like all the smutty details, you're not really gonna get a bunch of smutty details, but you are gonna get the pining. Next up would be the book Hall of Smoke. This is another new release from earlier this year. And when I think winter, beyond just thinking colder feeling and then retellings, I also, for some reason, just think Nordic. And this story very much feels like it is Norse mythology inspired. We follow a main character who at the beginning of the book loses basically everything that she has ever cared about. She was a priestess to this warrior goddess, and she thinks that her disobedience toward this goddess is what brought upon these terrible things that happen to everyone that she loves. So now she's sort of on this quest of redemption. She's on this quest to determine whether or not it is her fault. But as the reader, you don't actually know if her perspective is reliable because you're not sure if these gods and goddesses actually exist. You don't know how much potentially they can affect the lives of humans if they do exist, and if they do exist, you don't actually know if they are gods and goddesses. So there's a lot of questions that are unanswered that you want to keep turning the page to find out what the actual answers are. This one is a little bit of a downer of a story because our main character, she's not exactly cheeky and charming. She's going through a lot, but I in general enjoyed reading her perspective because this is a story of grief and a story of obligation, and how sometimes obligations can be slightly twisted depending on what we've been taught, what we've been told. It is technically a standalone as well, which is a little bit unclear. If you check on Goodreads, it says this is book 1 and that its sequel is book 2, but the author has clarified that book 2 is a companion story, not a direct sequel, so you can pick this one up and read it as a standalone, which is always nice in fantasy. In a similar way, you can do the same thing with the book Lancelot by Giles Christian. So this is, as the name would imply, a King Arthur retelling following Lancelot. So we've got the retelling aspect, and then also this is very historical feeling. I personally find that historical fiction, to me, because it's often so atmospheric, just embodies the seasons so well. And this particular story, while it is fantasy, it feels like historical fiction, and I absolutely love just following the characters, seeing how they have to go day by day to survive, seeing how they have these little things that are a part of their culture, or these little things that mean so much to them. And it's just, it almost feels slice of life. You do follow Lancelot from the time he is a boy. He goes through a lot of really difficult times in his life. He loses so much of what's important to him, and you're just kind of following him as he grows into a man. And of course, you're seeing how his life ties to King Arthur and how this particular author has recreated this classic story. The writing in this is absolutely stunning. I wouldn't say that it relies per se on metaphor and simile, but it is just so elegant. There's something to it that just transports you to this particular setting, which again, the setting is done phenomenally. It's a cold setting, but I wouldn't say that that's the focus necessarily. There's just something about it, that survival aspect that you so often get with cold settings. You have that in the story. And then also, I just think that the humanness of this, which sounds ridiculous, but there's something about just what it means to be a person and the values that we have in our lives and the people and what they mean to us. There's just something about the way the author writes it that is amazing. Just this author has a way of taking anything and being able to write it in a way that's captivating. Next up, forgive me, I took the sleeve off of this book, but we have Warrior of the Wild, which is probably the most entertaining, fun, happy of books on this list. So this author in particular, I have picked up a couple of books by them now, and every single time I end up having the best of times. They're so fun. I think they're great pick-me-ups, and they're cute. They're precious. So if you're kind of like, I don't want all those Debbie Downer books, is there something that's a little happier? Do I have to wait for spring and summer for the happier books? This one will fit the mark for the happy feels. We follow a character, which I know that when I describe the setup, it's not going to sound happy at all, but we follow a character who has been banished from their village, and the reason they were banished was actually kind of this setup. It wasn't their fault, but they've been banished, and now they have to try and accomplish what is essentially an impossible task in order to come back. If they do not accomplish this task and they come back anyway, they risk their chances of a good afterlife. So it's either risk their chances of their afterlife being awful or try to accomplish this impossible task. And they decide, you know what? I'm going to try to do it. I know it's set up for me to fail, but I'm going to try to accomplish it anyway, because I want to go home and I also want a decent life in the afterlife. While living out in the wild, our main character meets two other individuals who have also been banished from their villages, and the three of them decide, you know what, we're going to help each other with our impossible tasks. And so you get this friendship aspect to the story. You also get to know the characters, and there's that first impressions maybe aren't always the best sort of thing. And then also there's a little bit of romance, and the romance is adorable. The whole story is just cute. It's a cute, super fun, good time. The last book on the list for today is one that, had it come out earlier, I 100% would have recommended it for fall, but I still think that we're technically in fall, so you can pick it up now, and then also that it still fits with winter, and that would be Vespertine. Margaret Rogerson is the author of both An Enchantment of Ravens and Sorcery of Thorns, both of which also are quite fitting for this time of year, but this one in particular it's her new series, and it also has a hint of traveling to it. We follow a main character who is a priestess, this nun, who has to use a certain object, we'll say a relic, to try and help the nunnery, but in doing so, to protect the nunnery from evil spirits. She ends up kind of having the spirit within this relic inside her, and the spirit wants to take over control, and she has to try and balance out channeling enough of this spirit's energy and powers to help people while not channeling so much that she ends up being taken over by it. And so you have this snarky, manipulative, but also kind of funny voice in this character's head, and she's doing what she can to save people from something clearly going wrong, because spirits seem to be attacking people more than they should and more than they have in the past. I will have part 2 up very soon, so be on the lookout for that. But anyway, let me know your winter book recommendations. Let me know if you've read any of these. Don't forget, of course, to check out Book of the Month. Thank you again to them for sponsoring today's video. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Bye.